This was an absolute game changer for me when it came to making lo-fi and boom bap style beats. What's up and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. Today we are once again diving into the MPC one with some things that really helped me level up my lo-fi beat production. I've been watching creators like Eldre and especially Marlo Diggs, and the tips that they've given and the stuff they've shown have helped me pick up some tips that I now want to pass on to you to level up your beat production. Let's jump into it. So I've got multiple beats that I want to show you here and even more in the companion video for this one that I released on my second channel. I'll link it at the end of this video. It's a perfect part 2 to this one. But regardless, this beat that you heard in the intro is a great example of a bunch of the stuff that I want to show you. First up, a process-oriented tip, which is to start with the drums first. Don't even think about the sample that you're going to flip, just start with the drums and go from there. This helped me break out of several bad habits I had developed that were unconsciously holding me back. And so this is not a hard and fast rule by any stretch, but it's really changed the game for me. So here's our drums and a few little one-shot samples. We're going to get back to those other one-shots, but first hear the drums by themselves. So this is what I started with. This is the first thing that I did. So I didn't really have to have any inspiration going in. I just had to make a drum beat, which is fairly straightforward. And I had some good samples to work with. I had some Marlo Diggs stuff, some Eldre stuff, if I recall correctly, some stuff from Splice in various places. I've used stuff from my $5 sample pack, link in the description. But regardless, I've got some fairly lo-fi sounding drums, and I just kind of haphazardly loaded them onto the pads and went for it. There are a couple of major things I want to draw your attention to. First of all, I'm using 2 kicks here. So I've got my main kick, and then sometimes I'll alternate between the second kick. This can work great to provide some variation. And then to set the groove, I've got this hi-hat here, which did not originally sound like this. If I go to Program Edit and turn off the effect, it's just a normal hi-hat, but I've got this delay active. And I've got the dry wet not turned all the way up. So that second hi-hat especially is a little bit quieter than the first hi-hat. And so it kind of rocks back and forth and sets our groove. You could even play with this further by using a delay that's decoupled from your tempo. So it's just kind of free floating. And then you could get a slightly drunken rhythm coming out of it. But in this case, it's just straight ahead. You could also, of course, program this in. Sometimes you'll get samples that even have a little hi-hat flam built in. But this creates a groove that I really like. And by the way, that is a trick shamelessly stolen from Marlo Diggs. Also, in addition to alternating kicks, I'm alternating snares for little fills. Wait for it. And that tonal change, the fact that it's a bit quieter, a bit more muted, it sticks out and makes the drums feel a lot more varied and textured than they actually are, especially in a full mix. And then one more drums related thing that's become my go-to for MPC beats. Are these vintage emulation plugins that are built into the MPC. There's MPC 60, MPC 3000, SP 1200 Ring, and SP 1200. SP 1200 Ring's kind of a lot. It's a bit much. And there's no editing to be done on it. It's just take it or leave it. So here's without, here's with. It's subtle, but I really like the effect that that has. I should also note, if I go to my master track, I have the SP 1200 on my entire master. Here's without. Here's with. And also, I have a limiter feeding into it with the gain turned a little bit down, just so I'm not clipping going into those emulation plugins. You're going to see this trick on every single beat in this video and on the second channel companion video, by the way. This is my go-to. Process my drum bus with a lo-fi plugin, process my sample bus with a different Lofi plugin and process my master with a Lofi plugin. Usually I'll go for more intense Lofi plugins on the individual elements, like just the drums or just the samples, and then a more subtle one on the master. But in this case, it's actually the reverse and goes a long way towards bringing the beat to life and making it feel a bit more textured and lo-fi. So at this point, we've got our drums. Now let's move on to our main sample chop. It sounds a little bit messy on its own, but you can't hear those seams when it's sidechained to the kick. So I didn't worry about cleaning that up. Regardless, because I've already established my groove, all I had to do now was just pull in a few separate samples, not knowing which one I was going to use, and then I just started chopping them up and seeing how different chops fit together over the drum pattern that I already had. I had my sidechain set up, I had all that ready to go, and I'm actually using two separate samples and bringing them together into one continuous chop, and you wouldn't even realize that they're from two different sources. So first of all, I'm just relying on the kind of innate groove of this first sample. That little bass slide is a perfect cue to loop it. So we intercept that bass slide, interrupt the pattern with this. This is from a different sample entirely, and I've just pitch shifted it to be in the key of the first one. Now in this case, it's from the same pack, and so they go together quite well. But previously, when making sample chop beats, I would start by chopping up a single sample and go from there, and that was really boxing me in ways I didn't realize, whereas boxing myself in with drums first helps me find the groove, and not be constrained to which sample I'm using. And then we go back to the first sample and use that as a little turnaround. It just works. And by the way, this is another thing that I just kind of picked up myself. I worry about copyright stuff when sampling. I've done videos in partnership with TrackLib before, and they help handle that clearance, but it's not cheap to clear samples, and sometimes I just can't be bothered. So my other go-to for samples has honestly been Splice, because here's my thought process. I'm thinking, okay, I want to sample a song, but I want it to be kind of guaranteed cleared before I even touch it. So maybe I should look for copyright-free stuff, or maybe I should commission some like Fiverr musicians to record some stuff, and I might still do that at some point. That sounds like it would be a fun video all its own. But what's a place that has a bunch of music right there for you with everything already pre-cleared? You can pick out whatever you want and just go for it. Splice. And if you sort by music, you can basically get full 8 or 16 bar pieces of music that are either meant to demonstrate what's in a pack or are meant to be flipped in the way that I'm doing. And yes, other producers are going to be using those sounds, but if you merge different samples together, like I'm doing here, I'm flipping between two different songs, then I think you can pretty well hide your sources. And I've got a few more examples of doing this. And I've also gotten packs from producers like Eldre, once again, check out the second channel video, and packs from Marlo Diggs, which you're going to see in a second in this video. Regardless, I've actually gotten a lot of mileage from not overlooking sample packs as a source for samples to properly chop and flip as if I'm like digging through records. So that's our main chop. And for good measure, let me just show you that track that all of those sounds are living on. I've got the ducker at the very end and a little bit of reverb just to kind of help stuff blend together, get a little more stereo width, a little more space. And in this case, I didn't put a lo-fi plugin on this track because the one on the master was plenty, and there's some kind of vinyl crackle in the original samples anyway. So that's the basis of our beat. I've also got a second sample chop, and this is a bit of a tangent, but one that I definitely want to make sure I cover. It flows perfectly back into the kind of main section and helps extend the song and give it a bit more dimension. Once again, it's comprised of those two main Splice samples with different chops and a few of the same chops just rearranged a bit. tangent over. Now, here's another thing that I didn't originally think to do, but have now gotten into the habit of doing: layering chops. So you've got your main sample chop, and then you've got all these little cuts taken from other records or other sources or sample packs or whatnot, and you just start layering them on top. And it helps you create a bit of a melody, even if you haven't written a proper melody. So in this case, so I've got these extra little samples, and I don't have a whole lot of processing on either. They're pretty simple, but they go a long way layered on top of our main sample. I've just found little pockets that they can fit in throughout the beat, and I've tuned them to match just by ear. The other little sneaky benefit of these extra sounds is that now you've got more to work with when arranging, because I can do a pass with just my main sample chop and my drums, and then a pass with my sample chop, drums, and the little one-shots layered on top. It creates instant variation. So now I've got everything I need to arrange, say, a 2-minute song, something that can go on a beat tape or something like that. I also might dip into the XY grid, or use some kind of beat stop effects at strategic places, and once again, just add variation over time. Regardless, here's another beat made in pretty much the same way. So hopefully you can tell how all of those techniques that I just talked you through apply to this second beat. So real quick, here are the chord one-shots that I've sequenced out into a chord progression. And I've got all these one-shots on top of them. Some of them processed a bit, some of them not so much. And then, of course, here's my drum loop. Same hi-hat trick. Same double kicks. Same second snare. A lot of the same tricks. Similar processing. And this time there's a bit more going on the sample chop track. There's an SP1200, another reverb, an EQ to cut the lows because I've got a dedicated bass this time around, and of course the ducker. So let me turn all that stuff off. And then finally, the bass. So this is the bassline plugin on the preset Punchy Sine, and I've got some nice glide. Just kind of following what the sample is doing generally. So here's a third beat using pretty much exactly the same techniques, except now I've got a machine kit that I've converted and loaded into here, and we're flipping another splice sample instead of sequencing chord stabs. And finally, one more beat that uses all of these same techniques. You'll probably notice in these last couple of beats that we've got this drunken drummer pattern going on. This is something that I played in completely unquantized, and then I've gone into my grid after the fact, and I'll often just adjust stuff to be just a little bit more in the pocket. Not perfectly on the grid, just if I couldn't quite play it in right, I would move it around until it felt right. So I'll just turn on Don't Snap, select a note, and then just scoot it around. Just going by ear, and I'll use a combination of playing stuff in live and then tweaking it afterwards to make sure everything is just really in the pocket that I have in my head. And generally, a good approach to take, it's of course not a hard and fast rule, but it's a good starting point. Have every second hi-hat delayed a little bit. So this one's right on the grid, this one's a little bit late, this one's basically on the grid, this one's a little bit late, so on and so forth. And then your snares, have them hit a little bit early. And then you're just kind of finding little pockets to put your kicks and your other percussion in around those two ground rules. That's really worked for me, and then you can have more or less drunken drummer swing depending on the track that you're working on. So if you've not had enough lo-fi beats by now and want to hear even more and see a few more tips, check out this video on my second channel, Beat Goblin. I'll see you over there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with a new video on both channels in a little bit.